Thank you, David. That's the most eloquent presentation or introduction I've ever had. I don't even know if I want to talk now. Anybody want to go for coffee? I'll try to keep it to 15 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about my life and some things, but I thought I'd ask you, nobody's asked you yet, so if I may, how many of you are aspiring, inspired, about to be more inspired entrepreneurs, if I may? Okay. Just nice to see. So these are some quotes that I culled from. It's easy to Google inspirational quotes, right? But these are some actually that stood out to me. And I'd just like to invite you for a moment to think about who was the person who said something that inspired you and what might that be. Just an interesting little exercise. All right, so I want to talk about three things, and for those of you who remember that phrase that's below there, it started with Aristotle, actually, and has been carried through to modern times. My school teachers, I must say that the woman who taught me this, I said, what was your last job? And she said, I was the director of dissemination and diffusion for the state of New Jersey. And I was like, what does that mean? Oh, I was a marketing gal. So these are the things I want to talk about. I grew up in a funny little place. It's called AC, Atlantic City. Some of you may know that. Migrated west, as Horace Greeley suggested to a lot of young people during the last century. I want to talk about a couple of life lessons and then this, so you can read that. Okay, so this is where I grew up. Those of you who know Atlantic City might not know that the game Monopoly was invented there, because I think in the Commonwealth countries you play the London version. But I actually grew up in the top corner there, right next to the policeman who was sending you back to jail, in Marvin Gardens, which is a real place on Absecon Island in South Jersey, Atlantic City. And Atlantic City got some fame. After I left, Jack Nicholson was there in 73 or 72 doing this movie, The King of Martin Gardens, and then Bob Rafelson was there, making that movie. And then Louis Bunnell came in 1980 after casino gambling came in and changed Atlantic City completely. And then you might know it from looking back at its sort of mafia days history as a sort of a rum-running resort between Philadelphia and New York mafias in Boardwalk Empire. What was an interesting bit of foreshadowing for me is that my mother and father were married on one of the first reality television shows called Bride and Groom. And so I literally am a child of the 20th century media. They were on the cover of this magazine, which was a predecessor to TV Guide in the state of New Jersey. So this was me when I graduated high school. We'll skip those 18 years, formative years. And I went off actually to sort of see what I was going to do with my life. I went to Antioch College because in student life it said shoes must be worn to graduation, and I wanted to see if that was true. Antioch was one of the most innovative places in the country. Some people, in fact, most of my parents, friends' parents called it most radical school of its time. It was a cooperative school where you could actually go study academically and then take your leave and go on co-op jobs around the world, which included San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Greece, Italy, Israel. So nobody never knew what I was really doing. Along the way, I discovered this technology, which you may recognize. Does anybody recognize this technology? This technology was developed by Sony in 1969. This is the Sanyo version of it. But it was the first portable television equipment where you could record your own reality and play it back out of time, and essentially took the production of media out of the hands of the high priests of television who had their networks and advertising business models, and you could make your own TV. And so on my way cross country to San Francisco, I stopped in Aspen. The powder skiing was good, and serendipitously a guy with mirror sunglasses said, I own the local cable TV channel, and we have to do local origination and public access TV. And I said, well, I can do that production. That's what I learned in college. And so he said, well, you got a job, 8-minute ride, and I spent 4 years in Aspen doing community television before 20th Century Fox bought the ski areas with the profits of Star Wars in 1979. So a little bit of history. Aspen Maroon Bells on the right, which was a beautiful place. So I was asked this today, and I get asked this a lot, as many of you may. What do you do? So you know, I say now my life is a series of projects, and even I say special projects. But I have all these answers because, you know, it's hard. Some people think, you know, I say I'm living in Hawke's Bay, as, oh, you must own a winery or something. But I basically got here, you know, going cross country, didn't let the Pacific stop me, and I wound up actually coming to Sydney in 1992 to launch a product. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But what I want to go back and say is, this is a company I created in 1979. It was way ahead of its time. The woman who was the director of dissemination and diffusion was my marketing partner. I was the guy who had done my first satellite event, John Denver, live in 128 locations by satellite in 1979 for, of all things, the Episcopal Television Network. It was the early days of religious broadcasting. And I thought, well, there's got to be applications for this. And so this copy that you see, that you can read on the bottom, is copy that we wrote in 1979. Imagine trying to raise money for this business in 1979 as a 26-year-old guy with an idea. And so we didn't. We just kept plugging away, as you've heard from Rebecca and you heard from Neville and other days. And you just, because you believe in what you're doing and you think it's cool and you're on the cutting edge and you're vanguarding, you're pioneering, you're just out there doing your thing. And so 3 years later, after struggles, but lots of cool projects with wild, crazy people and doing some lovely things, you know, I spoke at a conference and some guy came up to me and said, teleconferencing is sexy. I'm going to take you public. And so in 1982, in 4 months, 120 days, we went public. Not as this company, though, because we never kept track of anything we did for 3 years, and it was too complicated to make the IPO window. So we went public as another company, Telemedia International. So if you look at About Me, this is some of the stuff that you'll find about me. But I'll just say, in terms of, you know, I grew up, you know, I was a teenager in the 60s. I wanted to go west because California was where it was happening. I went west. I made it to Aspen and Boulder, and then finally San Francisco. I worked in those three areas you see there in the 70s. I became a serial entrepreneur. I founded those 8 companies. 3 of them went public. 2 on the Denver penny stock market and 1 on the NASDAQ once I got to San Francisco. That company was a technology licensing business. Nobody had ever done a technology licensing business out of the valley, and nobody had ever dealt with the Japanese keiretsu, so we were all learning as we sort of went along. And that's sort of how and why I sort of got more and more involved in doing special projects, because it's always exciting. You just never know what's going to happen. And then in the noughties, I wound up doing thought leadership events, and I still do those today, and economic development, which somehow the development part fell off. These are the 2 things that I do right now that are annual things. The bottom one is new. I became program chair at AUT to help them sort out an event called The Project, and it looks like now helping them sort out in general the kinds of thought leadership events that the university would like to see happen in New Zealand. But for the last 10 years, I've been program chair for the Digital Entertainment Leadership Forum in Hong Kong, which is an annual event that brings together speakers from all over, I say, the Pacific Rim, mostly that way, not Europe or Africa, other continents, mostly around the Pacific Rim. So those are the things that I'm doing. So I wanted to give you some tips. So you've heard some today, and I really appreciate that that notion that Rebecca said of just don't be afraid, just call up and ask, because I'm the kind of guy, I just don't be afraid. Ask, because you never know what the answer is going to be. But in order to get to the ask, you got to show up somewhere. You got to meet people. And Woody Allen's phrase, I think, is really, some people have said it's 90%. But whatever you define as success, if you don't get out there and talk to people, meet people, then things aren't going to happen. When it comes down to it, it's countries that trade, business do transactions, but people do business with people. If you notice that in companies, when somebody leaves a company, then all of a sudden you may not be doing business with that company, but you're doing business with that person at a new company. You have to treasure your relationships. I think that's the most valuable thing that you carry forward from company to company or throughout whatever is your career. And it's really, really valuable. There's a guy named Tim Sanders who made his money being acquired by Yahoo, and he wrote this book, which I thought it's an unusual book. You can find it on Amazon, though. And in one of the chapters, he says, you know, when people ask you for a referral or if people have an idea and you can connect them to somebody else, do it. Give it away. You know, in the Valley, back in the 90s, people would say, oh, well, I want a 5% referral fee. Here's the document, sign here. But you should give your network away. It comes back to you. If it doesn't come back from the person you gave it to, it comes back from somebody else. It's good karma. It goes around, comes around. And your networks are valuable. So, you know, those of you who've built up networks on social media platforms, those are really valuable networks. Don't misuse them or abuse them, but use them wisely, and you will see. So for my 60th birthday, one of my Kiwi mates from Auckland sent me this, and I thought it was really a funny little joke, but he really encapsulated what my life has really been about. I'm a connector. I love to connect people together. I love to create synergy where possible and to build on things, make something bigger than it could be without me being involved or without it just evolving separately. So another tip. In businesses, you always have to, you hear this in lean startup, but strategy is always something you have to do. You have to pay attention to what's going on strategically, both in your company as you build it and outside of your company. There's so many different ways to get from here to there, as this little slide in the corner demonstrates. And so it's something you just constantly have to revisit. I put this slide up in a couple other talks I'd given, and I think it's helpful for those of you who think about building sales, marketing, business development operations. They're different activities, and you really need to understand the differences within each of those realms that can make a difference for your company. You can't hire biz dev people to do sales. You can't hire sales people to do biz dev. And marketing people, they're in the middle. So you want to be careful when you're doing what you're doing about building companies, about getting the right people for the right job, and really defining what that job can be. In the Valley, biz dev used to be a real position back in the 90s. Just recently, I was called by an executive search firm saying, we're looking for a head of biz dev, marketing, and sales. I go, oh, you mean 3 new positions? No, 1 position. I go, you can't do that. I mean, it just doesn't work. And so biz dev doesn't get as much cred as it should. But in the early days of Apple, for example, Guy Kawasaki made it famous as the term evangelist. But it was somebody who's really out there, doing strategic things for your company that are very hard to show that they have value on the bottom line, but don't disregard how important they can be. All of you, I think, have learned about Edward de Bono in school. I met Edward de Bono back in the early 80s. He wanted to do live satellite events to spread the word about his courses. And I think he's done a phenomenal job, getting the word out there. And I think this book that he wrote is really important for companies. You have to wear different hats every moment of the day. You might be switching between red, yellow, blue, black, but try them on and think about the things that you're hearing, processing, strategizing with those different hats. And then simultaneously think about timing your moves. I remember when this guy said, teleconferencing is sexy, I'm going to take you public. I said, okay, but it has to be in September because that's when the window is open. And we were like going, oh God, so what do we need to do to make that window? And so I've always thought about timing our moves because we didn't have a choice. It was a fixed window. We were going to make it or not. And there were a lot of problems until we finally said, okay, we'll assign all the assets to a new company that has no financial history because it's too much. All of our receivables and payables were in a box somewhere in the back of the house. We needed to really just create something that would make us make that time. So timing your move is really, really important. And if you're going to fail, failure in this culture isn't as, I guess, liberally thought of. We have FailCon in the United States where people come together to celebrate people's failures, a failure conference. I think that's, it's very valuable. But in the Valley, back in the day, actually, if you were to fail, people would say to you, I'm interested in your new company. What did you learn from your failure? And somebody might invest in you despite your failure because they think you're not going to make that same mistake. Or at least you've learned something from the mistakes you've made. And I think that's something that can be more integrated into this business culture, because it is what it is. Some ideas aren't going to make it no matter what you do. And so the notion of just keep on, I don't think is necessarily true. At some point, you bang your head against a brick wall enough, you have to say stop, another direction, or maybe there's a door. And this is one of my favorites, and I had to get Gandalf in somehow, okay? But, you have to do what you do, with the right balance. And I just love this shot, and I wanted to use it. So that's my sort of eighth business tip. Here's a personal tip. As a foreigner coming to New Zealand, and I've sort of adopted New Zealand as a country. My wife has sort of adopted me as a husband, and I'm thankful. I mean, I would never have stayed here otherwise, actually. They say it's work or a woman. It was a woman who kept me here and has for the last decade. But this no worries mate culture that I've now gotten to spend a lot of time in, I think people do worry a little bit too much. And you really have to think about how you savor happiness. And so I've looked through a lot of books, I've written one actually, but many years ago, but read a lot of those books that are 7 steps to this, 10 steps to that, 12 steps to the next thing. And they all sort of come down to, I think distilling personally these kinds of things. You want to savor your happiness, and the way you can do that supposedly most effectively, according to the best psychologists that I can find on the internet and or through my networks, says these 4 things. And I think they're very important to your personal life, which becomes interbalanced really, or intersects with your business life. And so how you are professionally and how you are personally are very intertwined. And so you really want to, I think, be in the best possible state of mind, whatever it is, operate at optimum, proactivity, whatever you want to call it. And so I don't want to repeat these things, but I think they're very valuable. And just, there's a magazine here called M2. It had an issue a while back called 100 Rules to Live By, and I actually thought they were really great rules, so if you want to Google that and find that. But the 3 that were repeated over and over again were smile often, laugh more, and do good deeds. And I think those are great things to think about. Okay, I'm going to try and go through the 4 letters, although collaborate lost an E there. These 4 letters really mean a lot to me because they encapsulate these words. And I'm a big communicator. If people don't communicate with me back within a reasonable amount of time, they sort of drop off my radar by de facto. And just as a story, since David said Geeks on a Plane, David McClure from Geeks was here in Wellington, met with the company, and we were having dinner, and he said, I just sent the guy an offer to invest $50,000, and we're going to see the opening of Lord of the Rings 2, so we can have the bragging rights, and if he doesn't answer, before morning, we're out of here. And he was, and that guy didn't answer. And so communication is really something you have to pay attention to. That's an extreme example. But collaborating and then catalyzing where possible within your teams, within your organizations, on whatever project you're working on. I'm a big believer in creating an umbrella and trying to bring people in to make things work rather than just silo and create more and more little activities that are separate from what's already happening. Passion's been said, and I think that punch above your weight is it is amazing to me when I go back to America and people say, oh, you've got Lord, you've got Peter Jackson. New Zealand punches above its weight in a big, way. No one can believe when I tell them there's only 4.5 million people living here. They go, no, it's got to be a bigger country. So they just don't get it. And I think that's what is so amazing about Kiwis I've met and New Zealanders in motion, trying to create what they want with passion, with perseverance, but also keep some perspective about where things are and how things go. Because just because you're world famous in New Zealand doesn't mean you'll be an overnight success in another world. So, and I love the phrase, it only took 10 years to become an overnight success. So the other thing in, I guess, life is, you don't you come into this world with much, and you really don't leave with much, except the reputation and respect that you've created throughout your life. And so you have to value that. You have to value what people may think of how you do what you do, the interactions that you've had with them. And there was a quote earlier from one of the, I think it was Maya Angelou. So it's really, really important. And what I've come to discover, having traveled 3 million miles actually in the last, whatever it is, 40 years. It's not that much, really. But in traveling to China, for example, people do business there based out of reciprocity. You know, they basically, if you do something, they expect you to do something in return. We did a favor for the mayor of Shuwei a couple of years ago, and then he wanted to top it up. He's like, well, we'll send you 2 plane tickets, and we're going to give you a free tour of Shanghai. And then we thought, oh, it was just all nice. And then at the end, we had to sit down in front of 500 people and tell them what we thought of his district. And we weren't prepared for that at all, but it was like he was topping us up. And so there's this reciprocity, which again exists, about sharing your networks, about doing business together, and just sort of keeping things at some sort of par. And then, as I said earlier, I was headed to San Francisco and got waylaid in Aspen Boulder, which is not a bad place to get stopped for a couple of years. And you know, it had to do with synchronicity. I was on the right lift at the right time, serendipity. Some guy happened to own the cable system, and I happened to have television production experience, and just the moment. You know, I took his card, and I said, I'll call you tomorrow. And that was it. I was in Aspen for the early days of local television. And it was a fun thing. And I think you have to be open to this, because what you think is the solution isn't necessarily where the solution's coming from. So I encourage you to pay attention to these 3 S's. And then, pretty much finally, and I won't read this, but this is what I believe. You know, we are exporting, over the last 16 months, China's become our biggest trade partner. They will suck everything out of this country to feed 1.4 billion people or build their 150 million plus, well, many million plus cities. We have to become an IP-based economy. And it is happening in some sectors with the creation of Callahan, with the creation of Digital HIP through NZTE. It's happening. But we need to celebrate the people who are getting there. And, you know, I landed in Hawke's Bay. Rod Drury lives there. Rod actually has the highest valued technology company in the country. And he's done an amazing job in doing it. And with, you know, he said today it was a gift. To, you know, have been named the most innovative company in a humble, you know, a way. So, and then Google on the other hand has become, you know, basically probably one of the hippest, hottest, you know, billion-plus company, mega billions company. And they're doing amazing things with their money. Sergey and Brin are trying to extend their lives so they can keep doing amazing things like Google X and Google Labs and whatever else they invest in, because their investors don't really have a say in the company. So there's a lot of amazing things happening with amazing people. We need to celebrate the people. And I hope that if you think big, start small, act now, whatever your idea may be, you could make it happen on a global scale, and we can build more IP-based companies out of New Zealand. And I hope that today, the Inspire's program, and as well as like the other speakers and everything that you hear, will enable you to do that. So good luck. We have 2,000 days till we all get to see 2020 to get together. Hopefully, we'll all be here, and we'll all be doing some amazing things. Thank you.